Okay, so one, this is why you'll often have to mind flip something countless times. Like, not going to stop thinking I'm worried about getting laid off just because she did the coin drill. Because that's a habit that's inside of her. That's a habit that's probably in her mother or her father or her family tree. It's also a habit that's in society. So most of what we're working on with the coin drill is something that everybody around us is also manifesting. The problem is that that's been creating neural networks behind the scene of your ego's awareness since the day you were in your mother's womb, or progressively along the way, which is why our childhood development period is so fundamental. This is why Jung says all children are tasked with the unfinished business of their parents' lives. So the answer to your question is that you will have to keep working with that negative thought, belief, or emotion until you have developed a new neural network that is more efficient than the old one. That is why it's extremely important to take the time to visualize yourself as that person with that skill or ability, because the more you can convince your mind with love and emotion and vision that that is the truth of you, the faster the neural network forms and the stronger it forms. And therefore, there comes a day at which it will actually override the unconscious. Prior to the day that it overrides the unconscious will be you just ignoring the thought. And I will say, thank you, dear pain teacher, for showing me where I have a mind virus, and I just ignore it. In other words, what you do is you get to the point where you realize it's just like an echo from the past. But before, you used to get nervous, anxious, and maybe wound up when you had that thought. But now you just ignore it. And it's just like a fly buzzing your head while you're meditating. You just ignore it. You know, it's not going to hurt you. It's buzzing. So the first stage is you do it enough that you learn to ignore it. And even better, you say, thank you for the reminder to step into my truth and emotionalize it. Then the next stage of development, which can, depending on how deeply ingrained or how much pain or fear is attached to the driving negative, that the I can ignore it stage could last a while, but then all of a sudden you realize it's been a year and you haven't even had that thought and go, oh my God, I used to think like that all the time. And all of a sudden one day someone says to you, don't you ever get worried about not having enough money? And you say, well, I used to. And you realize, God, I haven't had any fear about that in months or a year. And that's how you know the new neural network has taken over. The other thing you got to remember, though, is that the new neural network only has so much strength. So it might tip the scale as long as your intention is well tuned. But when you get an event like COVID that's scary, the more fear there is, the further down in your unconscious you will go, because the deeper you go in the unconscious, the more thoughts, feelings, and emotions have repeated themselves, and the deeper the automaticity of those thoughts are. Think of the unconscious like a record, and think of every thought, feeling, and emotion as a force that cuts a groove in the record. And the more scared you are, the harder you're pressing down on the needle, digging a groove in a record, right? So even if you've got new ideas, I love myself, blah, 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 when you get really scared, because cognition takes a lot of time to process and a lot of energy, your brain will automatically jump to an old program, because whether it's healthy or not, the illusion is that you can react to the environment faster without thinking. When you're running from a lion, you don't have time to think about what you're going to do. So that's where instincts take over. And your instincts are coupled to your subconscious mind, and your unconscious mind will carry all the beliefs. For example, what happened during COVID? You saw Russell Brand become a born-again Christian. You saw J.P. Sears become a Christian, and many others. Why? Because they reverted back to childhood programming where there's a daddy that will save them in the face of a great threat. Yet prior to that, there were these high-talking, spiritual, awakened, enlightened people, and I'm not picking on them. I'm saying this is how, look at Jordan Peterson, for God's sakes, Deepak Chopra. These are really good examples of how, if you're not conscious enough to know what's happening and to stay anchored in your legitimate trust in your own soul and your own spirit to guide you, then you will go to an unconscious level where you have a mythological deity that's been programmed into you by your culture, your society, And that's very dangerous because almost all those mythological gods, such as the God of Christianity, war with each other. And what's going on right now? Is that right? So what you see is it takes quite a fair bit of commitment to your own spiritual growth to recognize the signs and symptoms of when you're about to revert down, and you'll know it because you'll start thinking, I better do this or God's going to burn me in hell. And you'll be going, God. And then in a moment you'll think, why am I thinking that? I don't even believe in that God. But that God takes no energy to embody because it's rooted in your unconscious. And this is why we have to understand the law of facilitation. The law of facilitation says when an impulse passes once through a given set of neurons, a neural network, it tends to do so on a future occasion, and each time it traverses this path, the resistance will be smaller. In other words, every time thinks, I'm worried about losing my job and not having enough money, it actually makes it easier for her to think that. And in the unconscious, it just becomes a loop tape that just repeatedly plays in the background whenever there's any association to someone says, oh, we're laying people off or the economy might collapse, then automatically by association, it triggers the loop. And if you don't have the strength to override it and stay anchored in your current sense of self, reality, and dream, then you'll be pulled down very quickly. That's why we saw so many yogis and holistic people all of a sudden abort everything that they'd ever been talking about for years and go right back to being just like the herd. That's why I call it spirit gym. That's one of the many reasons. But you see, to grow in a gym, you've got to go there regularly and you've got to meet resistance, and nobody else can do it for you. I can't work out for you. Your mom can't do it. Nobody can do it. And if you don't meet enough resistance with enough frequency to trigger growth, then going to the gym with your makeup on and sitting and watching a television screen while you hardly pedal a bike and 3 months later wonder why you're not losing any weight. Well, that doesn't require a lot of brain power, but a lot of people go to the gym and do that. Okay. So when we're in spirit gym, we have to realize that the number one thing that's gymming us is our mind, is our beliefs. And it is our mind, our fears, and our beliefs that become the bell that gets rung by the stimulus from the environment, which is why you see repeatedly the fear of death being used to sell vaccines, to sell alarm systems, because they know how the brain and the nervous system work. That's how social media is designed, is to capture your nervous system. And if you're not conscious of how the game is being played, this is why video games are so dangerous, because they create dopamine surges and you become like the rat that won't stop pressing the lever for more sugar, water, or cocaine, even though you're starving to death and about to die, because you're so attracted to the dopamine hit, which means they have captured your mind by the use of technology, and you are now a slave to it. And then you will make excuses to justify your disease because you're addicted. And that could be with anything: exercise, sex, money. I mean, video games, just a common example. There's 1,000 ways to get trapped in your head. Any habit, any behavior, the number one driver of unconscious programming is fear. That's why I quote Zig Ziglar: most fear is false evidence appearing real. And that's why I've said to people many times, even in Spirit Gym, what percentage of the times when you were afraid you weren't going to make enough money, or someone was going to leave you, or you were going to get sick, did it not actually happen? Most people would agree about 95 to 98% of the time. Okay. So what happens though, every time you do that, you actually reinforce the neural networks that generate that fear. So it gets easier and easier for you to be afraid all the time. And that's begins. The sign that that's happening to a dangerous level is anxiety. The sign that it's happening for so long that you can't control it is depression. Now you become a slave to your own programming. Anxiety means I'm afraid that yesterday will be today. Depression means I'm afraid that today will be tomorrow. And so Spirit Gym is really created out of everything I've learned working with myself and 41 years of patients and clients, because I always use myself as the guinea pig, and I have had to be honest with myself because I can't legitimately sit here and teach you this stuff if I don't know it works. Otherwise, I would destroy my own ability to support my family, because if there's nobody in Spirit Gym, then I got to go back to working on bodies or something, which I'm totally uninterested in because I've been doing it for so long, it's boring to me. In other words, as you get older and wiser, especially as a therapist, you also get wiser to what actually works the best. It's easy to give people a good program But what's really hard is the behavioral change to get them to do it. People pay me thousands and thousands of dollars to guide them in diet, lifestyle, all the things that we talk about here. But I would say 90% of them don't even do it. They just dabble in it. They never really get into it, no matter how much money they spend, right? Because they're not ready to take responsibility for themselves. And that's what individuation means. It means stepping into the responsibility of being your own dreamer, your own God, instead of a victim to everybody else and to society and to circumstance.